still remember the night my entire life came crashing down. It was raining outside. The kind of rain that taps on your windows like it's trying to tell you a secret. I was sitting in my favorite chair. The same one I've had for 20 years. A cup of tea growing cold in my hands. I had no reason to suspect that within minutes, my entire existence would feel like a cruel joke. I had always thought of myself as a strong woman. I'd survived heartbreak before, the loss of my parents, the struggles of raising a family on a small income, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to learn. I reached for my husband's old briefcase that he had left in the hallway. He never usually forgot it. And I thought maybe he'd left some work papers he'd need the next day. But as I opened it, a thin manila envelope slid out, sealed but with a tear on the edge. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled out the contents, photos, letters, hospital records. At first, my mind couldn't process what I was seeing. There were pictures of children, 4 of them smiling, playing, growing up. They all looked so familiar in a way that made my heart pound. One of them had my husband's same smile. Another had his stubborn chin. My hands trembled as I flipped through the documents. And then I saw it, the name of their mother. It wasn't some stranger. It was my own sister. My knees buckled, and I fell to the floor. The photos scattered around me, like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. I couldn't breathe. My ears rang. The room spun. The man I had loved, trusted, shared a bed with 4 decades, had fathered 4 children with the woman I grew up sharing secrets with. I don't know how long I sat there on the cold floor, tears streaming down my face, clutching those papers like they might burn me. When my son walked into the room, I thought maybe he'd comfort me. I showed him the photos with shaking hands, expecting him to be as shocked as I was. But he didn't look shocked. He didn't even look surprised. He just sighed, sat down across from me, and said quietly, "Mom, we didn't want you to find out this way." Those words hit harder than any betrayal could. We? Who was we? And that's when it hit me like a knife to the chest. My son had known. He had known for years. He had eaten at my table, kissed my cheek, watched me hug my husband goodnight, all while carrying this monstrous secret. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break every dish in the house. Instead, I sat there in silence, my tears drying on my face, my heart turning to stone. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my chair until the sun came up, staring at those photos, memorizing every detail. The pain was unbearable, but somewhere deep inside me, a fire started to burn. I realized something in those quiet hours. I had spent my whole life giving love, giving forgiveness, giving everything I had to my husband, my sister, my son. And what had I gotten in return? Lies, secrets, betrayal. That was the night I decided I wasn't going to be their victim anymore. I didn't move from that chair until sunrise. When the first light broke through the curtains, it felt like the universe was mocking me. How could there still be a sunrise when my whole life had just ended? I stared at those pictures scattered on the coffee table and tried to imagine the kind of woman I had been yesterday before I knew the truth. She was softer, gentler, naive. I hated her now. Let me take you back to the beginning so you understand why this betrayal runs so deep. I met my husband, Thomas, when I was 21. He was charming, with that kind of smile that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. He was the kind of man who pulled out chairs, opened doors, and always smelled faintly of cologne and sawdust from working construction all day. Back then, my sister, Lorraine, was my best friend. She was 3 years younger than me and had always been the wild one, pretty, spontaneous, a little reckless. When I introduced her to Thomas, I thought it was sweet how well they got along. We were like a little trio back then, hanging out together, laughing, eating Sunday dinners as a family. Looking back, there were signs, little moments that should have made me pause. The way Lorraine's laugh got a little too soft when Thomas told a joke, how she always managed to sit next to him at the table, how she'd brush imaginary lint off his jacket when I was standing right there. But I was young, in love, and too trusting to see it. Thomas and I got married in a small church with white flowers everywhere. Lorraine was my maid of honor. She cried harder than I did at the ceremony. I thought it was because she was happy for me. The first few years of marriage were good, better than good. We had our son Daniel, and I threw myself into being a wife and mother. Thomas worked hard, and we saved every penny to buy this house. Lorraine would come over often. She'd babysit Daniel, help me cook, gossip late into the night like we used to. And slowly, I started noticing things that didn't feel right. Like the time I walked into the kitchen and found Thomas and Lorraine talking in hushed voices, stopping mid-sentence when they saw me. Or the time I found a bottle of expensive perfume in the glove box of Thomas's truck. When I asked him about it, he said he'd bought it for me, but forgot to give it to me. I believed him. I always believed him, because that's what you do when you love someone. You give them the benefit of the doubt. Over the years, I buried my suspicions so deep, I convinced myself they weren't real. Thomas and I had ups and downs like any couple, but we made it through. Or so I thought. Now, sitting in my living room decades later, looking at those 4 children, their children, I realized every doubt I had ignored was a missed warning. Every gut feeling I pushed aside was screaming at me back then, and I had silenced it. And Daniel, my sweet boy, I raised him to be honest. I taught him right from wrong. And yet, he had looked me in the eye every Christmas, every birthday, every Sunday dinner, and kept this from me, the thought of all 3 of them, my husband, my sister, my son, sitting together, probably talking about how to protect me from the truth, made my blood boil. I didn't need protecting. I needed respect. I spent that whole morning thinking about my life. Every memory felt different now, like someone had taken a black marker and scribbled over all the happy parts. I wasn't just hurt. I was humiliated. And then something inside me shifted. If they had spent years lying to me, building a life right under my nose, then they had built it on the belief that I would never fight back, that I was too weak, too soft, too nice to do anything about it. Well, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. I wasn't going to confront them in tears. I wasn't going to beg for answers. I was going to take everything they had built, the life they had tried to keep hidden, and burn it to the ground. But before I could do that, I needed more information. I spent the next few days moving like a ghost through my own house. I didn't tell Thomas what I had found. I didn't tell Daniel. I smiled when I had to, cooked dinner like usual, nodded at their small talk, but inside, I was sharpening knives. My first step was to find out exactly how long this had been going on. The pictures I found showed kids who were at least 10 or 11 years old, which meant this had been happening for over a decade. 10 years of lies. 10 years of watching them laugh together at family gatherings, hug at birthdays, exchange knowing looks across the table, all while I played the fool. I started going through everything. Old receipts, phone records, letters, bank statements, and sure enough, the truth was there, hiding in plain sight. Secret withdrawals from our joint account that I had never questioned. Payments to a private rental property in Lorraine's name. Hotel bookings on weekends Thomas had claimed to be working overtime. Every discovery was like a knife twisting deeper, but I didn't stop. At night, I would sit at the kitchen table with my reading glasses, combing through paperwork, making notes, connecting dots. I made a timeline: when the kids were born, when Thomas had been out of town, when Lorraine had suddenly stopped dating anyone seriously, and then came the hardest part, Daniel. I couldn't wrap my head around why my son would keep this from me. Did he think I was too fragile to handle the truth? Or had he chosen their side over mine? One evening, when Thomas had gone to bed early, I knocked on Daniel's door. He looked surprised to see me standing there. "Mom, it's late. Everything okay?" I stepped into his room and closed the door behind me. "Sit down," I said. The tone of my voice must have told him I wasn't there to chat. He sat on the edge of the bed, fidgeting with his hands. "Daniel," I said, my voice calm but sharp, "how long have you known?" His face drained of color. "Known? What? Don't lie to me." "About Dad. About Aunt Lorraine. About those kids." He swallowed hard and looked away. The silence was answer enough. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. "Mom, I just didn't want to hurt you." I laughed a cold, bitter laugh that didn't sound like me. "Hurt me? Daniel, do you think watching me sit across from your father and his mistress, my own sister, for years without knowing wasn't hurting me?" Tears welled in his eyes. I thought it was better this way. That you'd be happier not knowing." That was the moment something inside me turned to steel. He hadn't just kept their secret, he had protected them. And in doing so, he had betrayed me just as much as they had. I stood up and walked to the door. "You made your choice, Daniel. I hope you can live with it." He started to say something, to explain, to apologize, but I didn't want to hear it. I left the room and closed the door quietly behind me. The next morning, I started phase 2 of my plan. If they wanted to build a life behind my back, I was going to tear it apart right in front of them. First, I called a lawyer. I had always left the finances to Thomas, but I wasn't stupid. I knew enough about our accounts, our savings, our assets. I wanted to know exactly what I was entitled to, and how much I could take without warning him. Then, I reached out to a private investigator. If I was going to do this, I needed undeniable proof: photos, documents, witness statements. I wanted to be able to look Thomas in the eye when I confronted him and leave him no room to deny anything. Within 2 weeks, I had a thick manila folder full of evidence. Pictures of Thomas and Lorraine together, holding hands, kissing, going into that house they shared. Birth certificates of the 4 children with Thomas's name listed as the father. Financial statements showing how much money he had funneled to Lorraine over the years, money that had come from our marriage, our savings. I sat at the kitchen table and flipped through it all, page by page, until I felt numb. And then I smiled, because now I had everything I needed. I waited. I didn't rush. I didn't call anyone to confront them. I let them live in their little bubble of lies a while longer. Every laugh they shared, every casual moment, fueled my patience and sharpened my mind. I imagined the perfect day to strike, the exact words, the precise way to deliver the evidence so it would leave no room for excuses, apologies, or tears. The day came quietly. I had already arranged for everything: my lawyer, a few trusted neighbors who had known my family for decades, and the private investigator who had gathered all the photos, documents, and proof of their betrayal. I called Thomas that morning. "Thomas," I said, my voice calm and controlled. "I think it's time we had a family meeting. At home, everyone present." He sounded hesitant, a flicker of doubt crossing his voice. "Okay? What's this about?" "Just a family matter. You'll see." He didn't like the tone of my voice, and I could tell. That small hesitation, that tiny crack in his confidence, gave me satisfaction. It was the first real crack in the armor of their perfect little deceit. By noon, everyone had arrived. Daniel, Lorraine, and Thomas all shuffled into the living room. Suspicious and uneasy, I sat in my favorite armchair, the folder containing all the evidence resting on the coffee table in front of me. Sunlight poured through the windows, making everything look calm, ordinary, a normal family afternoon. But I knew differently. I began slowly, deliberately. "You know," I started, my voice gentle but steady, "families are supposed to be built on trust, on love, on honesty." I paused and let my eyes sweep across the room, landing first on Thomas, then Lorraine, then Daniel. But sometimes, people choose lies, and sometimes, they think they can hide the truth forever. Thomas shifted in his chair. Lorraine's face paled. Daniel looked down, avoiding my gaze. I smiled softly. Let me show you what I've discovered. I opened the folder and spread out the photos, the statements, the birth certificates. I watched as their eyes widened, as color drained from their faces. Thomas's jaw tightened. Lorraine's lips quivered. Daniel's hands trembled. This, I said, pointing to the photo of Thomas holding the youngest child, is not just a picture. It's 10 years of betrayal. For lives built on your lies. And you, Daniel, I looked at my son, have been protecting them instead of me. I let the silence stretch, thick and suffocating. I could hear their breathing, the ticking of the clock, the faint hum of the air conditioner. I've given you years of patience, I continued, years of trust. And this is how you repay me. Thomas tried to speak, but I raised a hand, stopping him. No, save your excuses. Save your apologies. I have already done the math, and I have already made arrangements. I could see the panic in their eyes now. The moment had come. You thought you could take my life, my money, my dignity, and hide behind your lies, I said. But I've taken care of everything. The accounts are now frozen. The properties reassigned. The inheritance redirected. Every penny that belonged to me is now back in my hands. Lorraine gasped. Thomas stumbled back slightly, as if I had struck him. Daniel's face crumpled in disbelief. And as for the children, I said, I will provide for them as necessary. But do not think you will ever manipulate me or lie to me again. The room was silent except for my calm, deliberate voice. I watched them squirm under the weight of truth and consequence. I had waited years for this moment. Years of betrayal, humiliation, and grief had built me up for this, and now I was finally free. You all thought I was weak, I said, closing the folder. You thought I wouldn't find out, wouldn't act, wouldn't take back what was mine. But here I am. And remember this. I leaned forward, my eyes sharp and piercing. I am not someone you can ever deceive again. The finality of my words hung in the air like a storm. No one moved. No one spoke. I stood up slowly, collected the folder, and walked toward the door. This house, this family, my life, it is mine to protect, always. I left them in silence, letting the weight of their choices sink in fully. It was a long time before Thomas, Lorraine, or Daniel spoke again. I didn't care. I didn't need their apologies. I had one. I walked back to my chair. The afternoon sunlight still spilling through the windows, warming the room in a golden glow. I sank into the cushions, letting my body relax for the first time in years. The folder with all the proof was safely tucked away, out of reach, a silent testament to the truth. I thought about the years of deception, the betrayals that had cut me deeply. My husband, the father of my children, had thought he could manipulate life itself and hide it from me. My son, whom I had raised with care and love, had chosen to protect the lies instead of me. And yet, here I was still standing, still whole. I realized something important in that quiet moment. Survival isn't about being the strongest physically or the loudest in the room. Survival is about patience. It is about watching, listening, and understanding the truth, even when it is hidden behind the faces of those you love most. I remembered the faces of Thomas, Lorraine, and Daniel that day, shock, guilt, disbelief, all of it justified. But I did not feel hatred. No, my revenge had not been born of anger alone. It had been born of necessity, of protecting what was mine and reclaiming my dignity. Sitting there, I let myself breathe. I let myself feel the warmth of the sun, the comfort of my home, the satisfaction of a life reclaimed. I thought about the future, a future where no one could deceive me again, a future where I could live in peace with the knowledge that I had taken back control. I also reflected on the lessons I wanted to pass on. Life is fragile, trust is precious, and sometimes those closest to you can be the ones who betray you most deeply. But that does not mean you are powerless. Strength does not always roar. Sometimes, strength is quiet, patient, and deliberate. Sometimes, Strength is knowing when to act and how to reclaim what is rightfully yours. I looked out the window at the trees swaying in the breeze. Their resilience reminded me of myself. Life had tried to uproot me, to bend me into submission, but I had remained steadfast. And now, I was free. I whispered a small prayer of thanks, not for revenge, not for victory, but for clarity, for patience, for the wisdom that had guided me to this moment. And as the sun set and the room filled with warm, golden light, I knew one undeniable truth. I had survived. I had reclaimed my life, and I would never again allow anyone to dictate my worth, my home, or my happiness. This was the day I fully understood the meaning of resilience. This was the day I realized that no betrayal could ever break me completely, because my strength came from within. And from the life I had built for myself, I sat quietly, sipping my tea, feeling the soft warmth in my hands, and smiled. Life had thrown everything at me, yet I remained strong, wise, and finally at peace.